Okay, welcome to the Leland Speed Library's APA 7th edition citation presentation. So, of course, you can go to our citation guide through our LibGuides page. A link to that will be provided in the description for this video. But just in case you want an overview of APA, this will serve that function as well. I will note we also have an interactive tutorial for APA, which I will also include a link for in the description of this video. If you need just a little more practice, that is a wonderful tool for that as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, when we're talking about APA, the main thing to know is, of course, it's the citation style of the American Psychological Association. Various different fields of study use this citation style. But the main thing I need you to know about APA in general is the reason we cite is because in American writing, information and ideas are considered property of their creators. So to be able to use this property, we must do so properly and ethically, and we need to acknowledge the original creator of the ideas and information. So in academic writing, we do that through references, in-text citations, and attributions. Okay, so that's what we want to keep in mind as we're talking about citation, why we're citing sources. All right, so first and foremost, we want to avoid plagiarism, right, for various reasons. First, we want to avoid plagiarism because, just like we said, it's not our information. We're using other people's information, and the authors and the publishers own that information. We don't own it. So we need to give credit to that source and not pretend that it's ours, right? But also, we want to make sure that the information that we're providing, our original information that we're bringing to the table, is backed by good, well-founded research. And that's part of the process of citation as well. We are backing up our work with good, well-founded research. And so we have to avoid plagiarism. Another good reason to avoid plagiarism is because it'll get you kicked out of school, right? So nobody wants that. So let's get a working definition of what plagiarism actually is. Of course, that's just the act of using information from an existing source without giving credit to the original author. Now, the wording here is important because when we think about plagiarism, we tend to think it's if we quote from a source and we don't give credit to the author for the quote. Sometimes we feel like if we reword something, we're not plagiarizing, right? If we put it in our own words, we're not plagiarizing. But that's really not the case. And what you'll find is if you quote directly from a book and you don't cite it, then of course that's plagiarism. But also, if you paraphrase or reword something from a book article or an existing source, that's also plagiarism because you're taking the idea. And so therefore, even if you're just borrowing someone else's original idea and claiming it as your own, it's also plagiarism. So oftentimes we don't take plagiarism as seriously as we probably should. Now, also note an interesting concept here, that if you write a paper and later on you have another assignment and you want to take a paragraph from that paper, or you just want to resubmit the same paper, if you don't point out the fact that this is from a pre-existing paper, that can technically count as self-plagiarizing, right? Because by definition of plagiarizing, you are copying from an existing work, right, without pointing out that it is an existing work. Now, that's not to say you can never do that type of thing, but you need to check with your professor first, all that kind of stuff. So be mindful of that, because self-plagiarism is something we often just completely overlook. So be aware. Now, let's talk about how we actually format these citations. So we're going to start with kind of the end here. We're going to start with how we format the reference list citations. And this is the general format that it's going to take. And again, you can find all of this in the APA citation guide, so be aware of that. But generally speaking, all citations follow a similar format. Author is going to be first. Then you're going to have the year of publication. If it's an article, you have the title of the article. Then you're going to have the title of the peer article that article is coming out of. That's going to be in italics. Then in parentheses, you're going to have the volume, you're going to have, after the title, you have the volume number. And then in parentheses, you're going to have the issue number. followed by the page number, and if there is a DOI, you include the DOI. Now this is for both print and online sources, okay? Now, if there is no DOI, you simply leave it off. You don't have to include a URL like you would formerly in 6th edition. You just leave it blank, as if it's a print article without a DOI, okay? Remember though, sometimes when you're looking in the record for an article, there won't be a DOI in the record, but if you check the first page of the article, sometimes you will find that DOI. So always double check and be sure that there's no DOI before you exclude the DOI in your citation, okay? Now, newspaper articles are going to follow this format here. I'm not going to read it all out to you because I know you guys are fully capable of reading, and there are other places you can find this information. But this is, again, you'll notice it follows that similar format where you have the author, the date, the title of the newspaper, and then in the case of a newspaper article, if it's coming from online, you'll include the URL. So just bear that in mind as well. All right, personal communication. There may be times where you interview somebody as the source for your paper, and it's important to know how to process that and use it in your paper as well. So generally speaking, personal communication such as interviews are cited in text only and do not appear in the reference list of your paper. In text, they're cited as follows. So you do the author, which is the person you're interviewing, and you say personal communication, and then you do the date, right? Now, keep in mind, I have two different samples here. We have one where the author is also in those parentheses, and that's just displaying there are two different ways that you could use your work in paper. So if you're citing your author in the paper, or you're giving an attribution phrase, that I interviewed X person, you wouldn't put the author's name in the parentheses. If you're just doing a direct quote and you're not saying that so-and-so said, but you're just doing a direct quote, or you're referencing it, that's when you would do the author's name in parentheses, but we'll get to that in a minute. Book citations. There's going to be two basic types of book citations. First is your standard book that has an author. So you're going to have the author, again, year of publication, the title of the work. If it's in the 2nd or 3rd edition, you're going to include that in the parentheses after the title. The volume, if it's part of a multi-volume work, and the page number if you're quoting from a specific page. The location, which is going to be part of that publication information, right? Like where is it published and who the publisher is. If it has DOI, you're going to include that. A lot of books aren't going to have one, so you just leave it off if there wasn't a DOI. Reference books are going to look a little bit more like articles, right? Because you're just citing a chapter from the book or a section from the book. So you have the authors, the year of publication, then you're citing the chapter, right? And then you take a step back and you talk about the editors. So you say in the editors, and then the title of the overall book that the chapter that you're citing came out of, and then page numbers and publication information. Okay. Next, you have websites, and this is going to be a useful one for you guys to know when you're citing, different things. So here, two ways you may handle this. If you're just referencing a website, you're not actually citing the website, you're just saying this thing exists, then of course you don't have to add it to your reference list. But if you're using it as a source, you will cite it in your reference list, and that is how it is going to look. So again, it looks a little bit different than your normal citation, but again, most of these citations follow a very similar pattern, and that should be becoming pretty obvious, I should say. Now, government sources are going to be a little bit different, because often with government sources, you're not going to have a particular author. Instead, you're going to have a department or an agency. So for instance, with websites, you might find, and by the way, this is government and also for corporations and things like that. But you may find in a .edu site, and the article isn't written by a person, but it's written by the organization. Or maybe you're looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you're citing something from that site. Well, from the Occupational Outlook Handbook website, you may find that you're not going to find an author, but that's because the Bureau of Labor Statistics, excuse me, counts as the author. So you're going to use the department or the agency as the author if there's no author listed. A lot of the times, if it's a report, there's going to be a report number. Now, this is going to look different for almost every government or corporation in existence, but however that's presented on the document is how you will cite it in the report, and you're going to put that in parentheses after the title of the report. Otherwise, it's going to look almost the same, pretty much the same as most sources. Again, you can refer to the APA citation guide on our webpage if you need to know more info there. We're not going to worry about legal citations because odds are you're not going to use them. But if you need them, you can pause it on that slide before. Now, we're going to pivot into how you actually use the information in your paper. So this is how we're going to do in-text citations, right? And there's three ways you're going to do this: quotation, paraphrasing, or summarizing. Okay, so first things first, you can do a direct quote. In APA, you're not really going to want to do a lot of this, and if you're doing it, you want to keep it brief. If it's a longer quote, you're going to have to do block text, right? So we're going to avoid that if possible. Paraphrasing, of course, is putting the information in your own words, rethinking it, in other words, and it's going to be used pretty heavily. And then finally, summarizing, which is taking in the entire source as a whole rather than just key concepts from the source. So three really good ways to handle information there, or three basic ways to handle information. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how those in-text citations actually look in your paper. And there are a few examples here. So first, we do see a direct quote, which is a longer quote, and so therefore it is a block quotation, of course. And things I want you to note is that you have two main ways to cite your sources in text, and that's using narrative or parenthetical citations. Okay, so regardless of whether you're doing a direct quote, a summary, or even a paraphrase, you're going to use one of these two types. Narrative citations are when you either introduce the author in your sentence, or if it's like a court case, you'd introduce the court case in your sentence. So we see a few examples of that here, where we have United States versus O'Brien, where we have Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire. We have here Downs, that's the author that he's citing there. And that's narrative citation, okay? And that, generally speaking, is going to be better if you're doing paraphrasing. For sure, it's better. If you're doing summaries, that's going to be a better way to do it as well. What you'll notice is after a narrative citation, you're going to have the date directly behind the author's name or the court case's name, depending on what type of citation it is, and it's going to it's going to have the date in parentheses directly behind that, okay? So that's important to note. The author's name followed by the date of the work in parentheses. So no matter where the author's name falls, the date will follow in parentheses. Beginning of sentence, middle sentence, no matter what. With the parenthetical citation, that's going to be used more often when you have a direct quote. So for instance, the block quote gives us a good example where you're not going to give a lead-in sentence potentially, so you just do the quote, and instead at the end you have the author and the date both in those parentheses. Now in the case of a quote, you also need to include the page number that you're pulling that quote from. So since this is a parenthetical citation, we have the author and the date at the end of the sentence, and so we just go ahead and throw the page number in that parentheses as well. But note down here we have the narrative citation, but it also includes a direct quote, and the page number comes after the quote at the end of the sentence. Okay, so be aware of that. And again, there are a couple other examples of parenthetical citations. With this sentence here, you'll see we have parenthetical citations that are not used in a direct quote context, so it just goes to show you can be flexible depending on how you need to use the information. Just know that those are the two main ways that you can do it. Now, I will point out, if you ever are going to be quoting someone who is quoting someone else within the quote, right? A quote of a quote. You use single quotation marks around the quote, within the quote, and of course normal quotation marks for the entire quote. Now, there are various different ways that you can credit your sources properly, and here's just some examples. And again, from the page, the slide previous, we saw examples there as well, so we're not going to belabor this too much. Main things to keep in mind: all information coming from sources should reference the author name and year. If it's a direct quote, it should include a page number. And then again, if at all possible, you want to use lead-ins and signal phrases. You don't want to just drop the information in. Now, if you're continuing to talk about the same source beyond just when you're citing it, and you haven't interjected a new citation, you can continue talking about it, and you want to do things like attribution phrases, right? So if you've already cited it in the previous sentence, but you're continuing to discuss it, this is where you'd use an attribution phrase. Now, finally, we're going to talk about how the formatting for your paper in 7th edition APA is going to be different than 6th edition. And if this is your first time using APA at all, you don't really have to worry about the differences. Just note that this is how you're going to format your paper if your professor wants a title page, etc. And so here's what we'll see here. At the top right corner, we have a page number. You'll note that there is no running head in the student edition of APA 7th edition. So when I say student edition, what do I mean? In 6th edition, there was only one way to format your paper. Whether you were typing a paper up professionally or whether you were typing a paper up as a student, you use the same formatting. In 7th edition, they really tried to differentiate between the student's needs and the professional's needs. And so there's going to be some difference in paper formatting. They just wanted to make it a little easier on the average student. So this is still up to the discretion of your professor. They may prefer you to format your paper in a professional manner. If that's the case, again, we have the link to our APA citation style guide. You can go down there and you can see a sample paper for either format. So don't feel like just because we're not covering in this video that you're left alone in the dark, because we do have solutions for you there. But with the student paper, no running head. If this is your first time doing APA, then probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it's just one less thing to worry about. But you do have the page number at the top right. You'll have the paper title, which is going to be bold and centered. You're going to have a double space going down to your name. You're going to have just normal double space lines. So when I say double space between the two, I mean space, space, and then normal double space line between your name, your affiliation. So you would just say Mississippi College. You'd have the course number you're currently doing this paper for or project, the instructor's name, and then finally the due date. Okay, so that's how you would format that title page. Now I will point out for the affiliation, depending on if you're majoring in a certain department, you go ahead and put that department you're majoring in. You may need to put the department that you're writing the paper for. It's a little bit flexible, so you might just put Mississippi College. Just be aware. Check with your professor to see how they want you to format the affiliation, or how they want you to fill in the affiliation page, I should say. All right, now if you have to do an abstract, it's still going to be the second page of your paper. You're going to have the page number up at the top, and abstract above centered, and then no indentation. You write your abstract. The abstract, generally speaking, is 150 to 250 words. It's accurate, it's non-evaluative, it's coherent and readable, and it's concise. Okay, nothing flashy, just stating what the paper is about. Now, as you're writing in an APA style, you're probably going to have headings. Now, good news is, odds are you're not going to get beyond the second or third level of headings. But just in case you do, this is how they actually look in practice. First level headings, which is going to be the title of your paper, centered, boldface, and title case heading. Second level headings are going to be flush to the left, bold, title case, and the text begins as a new paragraph. Third level headings look the same, only they're in italics instead. If you get beyond that, you indent, start with bold, and the text begins on the same line and continues as a regular paragraph. So in other words, the sentence beyond the text is going to just continue on from there. And then the final level is going to be the same, but in italics. This is kind of how that looks in practice. And here it is in a paper. So we have that first level heading at the top here. Again, another first level heading. We have a second level heading and another second level heading. All right, that's pretty much it for the APA introduction and overview. Remember, there are several different helpful sources down in the description below. And also these websites, of course, our website is linked from the description, but you may have luck going directly to the APA Style Guide, which is right there, as well as, of course, the Writing Center, which is a great resource, both for formatting citations as well as for your writing needs. So hope this video was helpful, and I hope to see you around the library, and until next time, have a good one.